Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we begin with Part 1, Preface and Akhenaten, from 12 World Teachers, by Manly P. Hall. 12 World Teachers, a summary of their lives and teachings by Manly P. Hall, 2nd edition revised. Preface. Wisdom is security in time of trouble. The wise man is free from those fears and worries which afflict the life of the uninformed. In these strenuous times, we all need knowledge and understanding that, fortified by these, we may face courageously the problems of each passing day. Even the most informed men are not strong enough in themselves or wise enough in their own judgments to live well without recourse to the accumulated wisdom of the race. In every generation, there are a few men of greater understanding than the majority. These are the prophets of their own time, and their inspiration leads others to more enlightened codes of living. History records a small number of extraordinary human beings who seem to possess in fullest measure those intellectual and spiritual virtues which sustain civilization. The words of these wise, good men have become the scriptures of the race. Their judgment and counsel have become the laws and statutes by which humanity lives. Many of these great teachers were obscure persons while they lived, but succeeding centuries discovered their greatness and elevated them to the highest estate in human veneration. The lives of the great teachers are inspiring records of unselfish dedication to the great needs of man. The teachings of the great teachers are magnificent expositions of that universal religious philosophy which has led the wise in paths of peace and truth for thousands of years. This generation is in desperate need of essential knowledge. By this we mean the knowledge made spiritual and philosophical through vision and experience. The search for this knowledge leads naturally to the great world teachers, who by word and example have set down the immovable footings of the house of truth. It is a difficult matter to choose from among the benefactors of humanity 12 who stand preeminent. Our selection has been guided by the desire to include the founders of great social movements, the influence of which has affected the destinies of nations and races. That other teachers may have existed whose minds were of equal brilliance and whose lives were equally dedicated to truth is not questioned. We have chosen those who fulfill special requirements. First, an extraordinary personal vision of the deepest religious and social significance, and second, those whose teachings have affected most profoundly and constructively the largest number of people over long periods of time. Even in this respect, it is difficult to limit our choice to 12 men. We do feel, however, that a thoughtful consideration of our selection will reveal that we have picked out 12 great fountainheads of knowledge, from whose abundant supply have poured forth countless streams of virtue and security, rendering fertile the broad plains of human life. Los Angeles, April 1937, Manly Palmer Hall. Akhenaten with his queen and 3 of their daughters on the balcony of his palace. Akhenaten is bestowing gifts, and in the sky above is the radiant Aten, its rays ending in human hands. Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, the Golden Hawk, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the only one of Ra, son of the sun, great in duration, the mighty bull, lofty of plumes, beloved of Amen-Ra and lord of heaven, was born at Thebes, circa 1388 BC. The name Amenhotep, in Greek Amenophis, means the peace of Amen. This great king was the only surviving son of Amenhotep III and his consort Queen T. On his father's side, he was descended from Thutmosis III, the spoiler of his enemies, conqueror of Syria, and the smiter of the princes of Zaleh. It was Thutmosis III who built up the empire which fell in the reign of Amenhotep IV. Queen T, a woman of extraordinary abilities, for many years regent of the Double Empire, is said to have been of Syrian origin. In the opinion of Sir Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge, it was the alien blood of his mother and grandmother that was responsible, in part at least, for the multitude of strange ideas on religion, government and art that dominated the mind of Amenhotep IV. The childhood of the young pharaoh seems to have been a continual struggle against the limitations of health, which afflicted so many of his dynasty. Amenhotep III, surnamed the Magnificent, appears to have been an incurable invalid. It was the tendency of the entire family to marry at an extremely early age, and he was married to the Princess T in his 12th year. When Amenhotep IV reached his 12th year, his health brought general concern not only to his family but to the whole empire. If he died childless, the dynasty would end. A suitable bride was therefore sought among the vassal states, and a hasty marriage was contracted. Royal families did not seem to enjoy good health in those days. Marriageable daughters of noble birth were difficult to find, many dying in childhood. The prince was united in marriage with an Egyptian girl named Nefertiti. She was of noble birth, the daughter of a prince named A. At the time of his marriage, the pharaoh was about 12 years of age and his bride 9 or 10. A short time after his son's marriage, Amenhotep III died in his early 50s, leaving the crown to the 13-year-old invalid who already showed a strange tendency to visions and dreams. In addition to being the wearer of diadems, Amenhotep IV was high priest of Ra-Horakhti, sovereign of the spirits, souls, and bodies of the Egyptian people, priest-king of the greatest empire on earth. There is a legend to the effect that Queen T, longing for a son, vowed him to the gods before his birth. Be this true or no, from earliest childhood, the young pharaoh was more of a priest than a statesman, and well deserved the title, the Great of Visions. Arthur Weigel thus describes the young king. One may imagine now the pharaoh as a pale, sickly youth. His head seemed too large for his body. His eyelids were heavy, his eyes were eloquent of dreams. His features were delicately molded, and his mouth, in spite of a somewhat protruding lower jaw, is reminiscent of the best of the art of Rossetti. He seems to have been a quiet, studious boy whose thoughts wandered in fair places, searching for that happiness which his physical condition had denied to him. His nature was gentle, his young heart overflowed with love. He delighted, it would seem, to walk in the gardens of the palace, to hear the birds singing, to watch the fish in the lake, to smell the flowers, to follow butterflies, to warm his small bones in the sunshine. Already he was sometimes called Lord of the Breath of Sweetness. Amenhotep IV ruled Egypt for 17 years. During the first 4 years of his reign, he exercised little individual authority. Queen T, as regent, was the actual sovereign. She was deeply impressed by the extraordinary mentality of her son and recognized in him forces more divine than human. The young king matured early, and by his 17th or 18th year was the actual governor of his country. The inevitable conflict between the youthful idealist and the priesthood of Amen took definite shape in the 5th and 6th years of his reign. Most writers, in comparing the religious ideals of Amenhotep IV with those of Amenism, speak in most depreciatory terms of Egypt's state religion. There is no doubt that the conquests of Thutmosis III and the magnificence of Amenhotep III had filled the temples with priceless treasures. It is also quite possible that grandeur had deflected the priests from their sacred duties and had allowed innumerable corruptions to undermine the integrity of their cult. This was not entirely the fault of the priests, however, for in Egypt the pharaoh was both priest and king, and a ruler given to war and plunder, being likewise the chief priest of the state religion, set a bad example to the whole priesthood. We may therefore say that the religions of Egypt were corrupted from the top down. When spirituality failed in the prince, it disappeared from the temples. It would be quite wrong to deny a deep spiritual significance to the ancient Egyptian religion. The gods of the various nomes or provinces of the empire were symbols of the great spiritual truths of life. The mysteries of Egypt were among the deepest of religious institutions, and the secret doctrines of India and the Old World were preserved in the Adita of the Egyptian temples. In examining the religious beliefs of Amenhotep IV, we should not think of his religion as entirely original. He perceived certain corruptions and limitations in the state religion, and being a man of exceptional spiritual perception, attempted to correct these errors by a new interpretation of the spiritual facts of life. It is difficult to say now whether he actually founded Atenism or merely encouraged a religious tendency already arising among his people. Certainly he did not invent the term, Aten, but rather gave new profundity to symbols and beliefs that had descended from the remote periods of Egyptian beginnings. The king's philosophy did not develop immediately into its final state, but evolved gradually over a period of several years. It is quite probable that during this period of unfoldment, he had the assistance and advice of religious reformers and philosophers who helped him to shape the general structure and define the boundaries of his reformation. He drew away from the state religion, gradually breaking one after another the immemorial traditions of the empire. It was when Amenhotep IV reached the 19th year of his life that he broke finally with the priesthood of Amen. He did not immediately attempt the overthrow of the Theban hierarchy. Rather, he set up his own faith in the midst of his adversaries, giving it the influence and authority of his own position as demigod of the Nile. It was after this official break with the old hierarchy that he changed his name. Amenhotep is a name rooted in the faith of Amen. Therefore, it was no longer appropriate for a ruler who had withdrawn his allegiance to the old order. The name which he chose, and by which he is now remembered, was Akhenaten, which means Aten is satisfied. Having broken forever with the old faith, Akhenaten found the way before him far from easy. The city of his fathers was dedicated to the elder gods. The state religion was firmly ensconced in the hearts and lives of the people. As time passed, he realized that he must not only break with the ancient faith, but he must also depart from its city and all of the ties of tradition and culture that flourished there. The young pharaoh chose a site for his new capital about 160 miles up the Nile from Cairo. Here he built the city of Akhenaten, the horizon of Aten. When he came to the site, he spoke to all who were assembled there, and they bowed before his will and did homage to him, and these are his words: "Ye behold the city of the horizon of Aten, which the Aten has desired me to make for him as a monument in the name of my majesty forever. For it was Aten, my father, that brought me to this city of the horizon." His new city, with its temple to the Formless One, being at last inhabitable, Akhenaten took up his residence there in the 8th year of his reign. Accompanied by his nobles bearing the records of the empire, and followed by a considerable concourse of people, he went forth to officially dedicate his new capital. With his queen and their 3 children, the young king established himself in a palace ornamented with carvings which represented the symbols of his faith. It was in the freer and more refined atmosphere of Akhenaten that the pharaoh actually established his religion. The spiritual ministry of Akhenaten commenced in his 22nd year. Here, in the shadow of great stone temples, was born the doctrine of the true Aten, the universal God, a doctrine of such profundity that it has moved scholars to say that Akhenaten was the first enlightened man of recorded history. Charles F. Potter, in his History of Religion, writes, "He, Akhenaten, was also the first pacifist, the first realist, the first monotheist, the first democrat, the first heretic, the first humanitarian, the first internationalist, and the first person known to attempt to found a religion. He was born out of due time, several thousand years too soon. Abounding in virtues unusual to his time, inspired by motives incomprehensible to his contemporaries, Akhenaten suffered as all idealists must suffer. From the 8th to the 13th year of his reign, he seems to have been principally concerned with the perfection of his doctrine in the city which he built. Budge describes him as living a strange life of religious and artistic propaganda. The empire flourished under his benevolent direction. During this period, his mother died, and his 4th daughter was born. Ti, the queen mother, seems to have exercised a powerful influence over her son's political attitudes. She was a modifying and restraining force, and very possibly remained to her death in the faith of Amen. His respect for his mother held Akhenaten's religious enthusiasm within certain bounds, but with her passing, this restraint was removed. By his 25th or 26th year, Akhenaten must have realized he had not much longer to live in this world. His constitution, always delicate, was growing constantly weaker under the strain of his overactive mind. The pharaoh therefore changed his program. He was no longer content to have only his own city dedicated to the true God. He began a powerful campaign to spread his religion among the cities and provinces of his empire. In the early period of his religion, he described God as the heat which is in the Aten. His unfolding consciousness brought a fuller realization, and he gave a new definition, the effulgence which comes from the Aten. The change indicates definitely a deepening spiritual understanding and an increasing grasp of the mystical factors of a great theology. Soon after the death of Queen Ti, Akhenaten issued an edict that the name of Amen should be erased from every inscription in Egypt. So complete and thorough was the work of his agents that scarcely a statuette remained from which the hated name was not defaced. Even the tomb of Queen T was broken into and the cartouches upon her mummy case destroyed. The names of kings which included some form of the word Amen were obliterated, and all who carried a name embodying the hated word were forced by law to assume some other title. This extreme action must have resulted from extreme persecution, and from the pharaoh's realization that only by the most drastic steps could his reformation be accomplished before his life ended. Akhenaten was about 26 years old when his fifth daughter was born. True to the traditions of the dynasty, he desired a son to carry on his work, but in the 14th year of his reign, a sixth daughter was born, and the following year, a seventh daughter completed his family. Thus the pharaoh died without a male heir. Much has been made of Akhenaten's domesticity. Certainly no other pharaoh is so often depicted in the informal domestic relationships. In carvings, he is frequently shown with his arm about his beautiful wife Nefertiti, a pose entirely strange to Egyptian art. The two are often shown playing with their children. In the 15th year of his reign, Akhenaten began the construction of his tomb. But the work was never finished, and his body was finally placed in his mother's vault, where it was discovered in 1907. The last 2 years of Akhenaten's reign may be regarded as the period of discouragement. The faith he founded was not strong enough to withstand the ever-present priesthood of Amen. Only a few of the most intelligent Egyptians could understand what he was trying to teach. The world was not ready for the rule of love. Added to his other perplexities were the clouds of war. It was the Hittite invasion of Syria that prepared the way for the end. Conspirators arose, and the vassal countries that looked to Egypt for protection sent messengers in vain. The governors of provinces pled for help against the invaders and traitors, but Akhenaten would not send arms. To the dreamer king, Aten was the one father of all men, and this ever-living god would not sanction war and pillage. The pharaoh stood firm, but his firmness was of no avail. His cities were conquered. Little by little his revenues ceased, for his governors no longer had provinces to tax. In 2 short years, the magnificent empire of Thutmose III was bankrupt. The strain of these troublous times destroyed what little health remained to the pharaoh. With the collapse of his empire, Akhenaten died. His end appears to have been sudden, for modern scientists who have examined the mummy are of the opinion that the end was due to a stroke. The body was no longer able to bear the worry and sorrow of a broken heart. On the front of his coffin he is called Akhenaten, the beautiful child of the living Aten, whose name shall live forever and ever. How strangely sad, how strangely beautiful is the prayer to the one universal Father which was found inscribed on golden foil beneath the feet of the mummified body of Akhenaten. I breathe the sweet breath which comes forth from thy mouth. I behold thy beauty every day. It is my desire that I may hear thy sweet voice, even the north wind, that my limbs may be rejuvenated with life through love of thee. Give me thy hands, holding thy spirit, that I may receive it and may be lifted by it. Call thou upon my name unto eternity, and it shall never fail. Thus passed from this life a soul too fragile to bear the shocks of flesh. With Akhenaten passed also the faith he had founded, the city he had built, and the dream of peace which had filled his heart. Great Amen reigned again, supreme and plumed with power. More than 3,000 years have passed since Akhenaten wrestled with the gods of Egypt. The homage of the modern world, a little wiser in the mysteries of spirit, may be best expressed in the words of Professor J.H. Breasted. There died with him such a spirit as the world had never seen before. Another modern student of the philosophy of Akhenaten, Mrs. Julia Ellsworth Ford, concisely states the great pharaoh's position in the evolution of civilization in her interesting article, Akhenaten, Pharaoh and Prophet. Akhenaten thus emerges as one of the most remarkable characters that have ever been born into the world. He was a prophet, a teacher of truth and sincerity, a seer, a philosopher, a reformer, a great poet, an architect, a lover of music. He was a brave and fearless rejecter of dogma, tradition, superstition. It is amazing the way he threw them off like dead leaves to the wind. Although a king, he believed in democracy and made friends of people of peasant origin. In all history and romance, there is no man who loved a woman more devotedly than Akhenaten loved Nefertiti. his position as ruler, his religion, his honors, all he shared equally with her, my great wife Nefertiti, as he called her. For the first time in history, 3,000 years ago, a government was run on the principle of love. It was not his principles, but the lack of principle in his enemies that destroyed him. The religious teaching of Akhenaten. The second millennium BC was a period of extreme religious obscuration. The ancient world had not recovered from the collapse of the Atlantean culture. The great social institutions of prehistoric times no longer guided the course of empire. Humanity was adjusting itself to a new vision and new codes of living. The mystery schools still flourished, but the number of adepts was small, and the secret doctrine could be given to people only in fable form, symbols and moral teachings of a simple nature. Most of the nations had their own gods and an entirely national or tribal outlook in religious matters. The gods of Egypt were the guardians of the Egyptians, but had no place in their hearts for other races. India still paid homage to its ancient tribal deities, worshipping spirits of fire and air. The Jew propitiated his own peculiar God as the Lord of Israel and protector of his tribe. The golden age of philosophy had not come to Greece, and it was to be more than 700 years before Buddha was to release India from the misinterpretations of the Brahmins, and Pythagoras was to lift the Greeks to first place among philosophic nations. It was against the concept of a tribal god that Akhenaten burled the strength of his inner conviction. He stood in the midst of images and altars raised to patron deities and tribal tutelaries. This enlightened pharaoh raised his voice in a glorious hymn of praise to the one secret and eternal spirit that ruled all men. To him there were no longer gods of Karnak, gods of Luxor, gods of Thebes. To him there was no longer Jehovah, Adonis, or Amen-Ra. There was one God, and though his names were many, his essence was indivisible. Picture a 20-year-old boy born to luxury and power, limited by the frailty of his body and the overwhelming strength of the tradition in which he lived, perceiving clearly and surely a spiritual truth that was to change the whole life of the world. Imagine the courage that it took to stand out against the gods of his fathers and to defy the priestcrafts that had ruled unquestioned for ages. The world has produced no braver spirit than Akhenaten, the beautiful child of Aten. As high priest of Ra-Horakhti, Akhenaten had often gazed into the face of the sun god. It was from meditating upon the cosmic significance of the sun that the young mystic came suddenly to understand the true meanings of light and good and truth. He realized that the sun did not shine upon Egypt alone, nor did its light and heat protect only the cities where it was honored. Its rays shone beyond the mountains and beyond the deserts. Its light cheered the barbarians and sustained even the enemies of Egypt. Nor did it minister only to human beings. Under its benevolent rays, all nature flourished. Flowers opened to its light, beautifully colored insects fluttered in its beams, and all the world was gladdened and rendered fertile by the luminous love of the solar orb. It came forcibly to Akhenaten's mind that the sun symbolized not only the glory of God and the magnificence of the celestial power, but also the infinite tenderness and intimacy of life. The deity did not rule from a chariot in the heavens, but flowed into all the earth, nursing tiny shoots in the ground and painting flowers with numerous resplendent hues. It was a far cry from the great stone faces gazing down in aloofness from the shadows of the temples to the god of Akhenaten, whose ever-present life gave strength to the wing of the bird and patient industry to the little creatures of the earth. Akhenaten found the spirit that dwells in the innermost and rules the furthermost. He bowed in adoration before the truth he had discovered and offered himself as a living sacrifice to the ever-living, ever-flowing sun. As a symbol for his religion, Akhenaten chose the shining face of Aten, the solar disk. The effulgence of the Aten he represented by rays flowing in all directions from the solar face. Each of the rays ended in a human hand to represent the active power of the light. And in some cases, these hands held the crux ansata, the symbol of the giving of life. The whole figure represented the hand of God in all things. "Give me thy hands," cried Akhenaten in his religious ecstasy. The young mystic walked with God hand in hand with the ever-living light. Having realized inwardly that God was life and love and light, he could find no place in the universe for ignorance and hate and evil. It is the opinion of some Egyptologists that Akhenaten was the first human being who realized the fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man. When he refused to send armies against the Hittites, he made the supreme sacrifice of his empire and his life, fully convinced that a God of love desired that men should live together in peace. In his heart was the peace of the Aten, the spiritual sun. As Pharaoh of Egypt, he was the personification of the Aten, the high priest of universal truth. It was therefore his duty to perform the works of the Aten and to be a manifestation before men of the virtues resplendent in the sun. This seems to be the root of the messianic doctrine. He chose to bear witness, to come as one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." Akhenaten then made another great discovery. He discovered the secret of living the Aten. Recognizing the presence of the universal Father in himself, he strove to live as the personification of the light. His own heart was the brilliant face of the sun. His every thought and action must give life like the innumerable hands which he figured on the rays of the Aten. He not only recognized truth, but he applied it, making himself personally responsible for his part in the shining of the Aten. There is a very subtle aspect to Akhenaten's philosophy of God. Amen-Ra was a heavenly king whose will all men must obey. Egypt bowed before the law which descended from heavenly rulers seated upon their great thrones in space. Akhenaten rejected the divine despotism. He did not bend to the dictates of super-mundane pharaohs. The laws of Aten flowed through the king. He lived in them, and they in him. Understanding, not obedience, was his creed, for we fear what we obey, but we love what we understand. He lifted up his heart in love to Aten and found at oneness with that universal love which enfolds all things in its mighty presence. In the dim past, Akhenaten stands enfolded in the Aten, luminous with the ageless light, lifted by his understanding into the very presence of the ever-shining one. Akhenaten was too great for his own day, and although 3,300 years have passed, he is too great even for this modern world. Christianity has not accomplished fulfillment of his dream. The tribal god survives, and in the 20th century is still the jealous father of the world. Only a few mystics have pierced the veil and found the real. Jew and Gentile, Mohammedan and Brahman have not yet found the common denominator, and millions of earnest Christians worship a god of whims and tyrannies, a petty despot in the heavens. How many centuries must pass before men can discover the God of peace who loves all his children? And how many centuries must pass before his children will have the wisdom and courage to sacrifice life, wealth and power to the spirit of love that pervades every atom of the world? It is impossible in the meager records that survive to outline the complete system of Atenism. The priests of Amen, when their power was regained, obliterated the records of the heretic king. For centuries, the name of Aten was not spoken. The temple to the formless one with its rays and hands fell to ruin, to be finally covered by the shifting sands of the desert. But this we do know. He was opposed to elaborate ceremonial and all the complicated machinery of the priestcraft. He worshipped Aten at its rising, the visible sun emerging from the night, the fulfillment of the eternal promise. He worshipped Aten at its setting, the symbol of light descending into the dark earth, even as Aten descending into the darkness of all things hides its rays in nature, to shine forth only as the works of nature. Aten, hidden with good words, good thoughts, and good deeds, is the ever-flowing proof of the hidden reality. Akhenaten offered prayers to the Aten, prayers that were the symbol of his own integrity, yearning for the real. In his great mystical joy, the king had to sing, and his very song was a ray of light, the light of the Aten singing to the Aten. He made simple offerings of fruit and flowers, and on rare occasions conformed in general to the spirit of Egyptian religion. But always he was honoring an ever-present spirit, the absence of which was unthinkable. It was never necessary to invoke the ever-present, for the Aten, though without ears, heard all things, without eyes saw all things, and without lips was ever speaking, and its words were beauty, harmony, and life. The spirit of the Aten brought with it the greatest art of the Egyptians. For the first time, the sculpturing and painting became alive. No longer did men carve only sphinxes with inscrutable eyes, or seated figures majestic but aloof. Akhenaten had found the rhythm and the flow of nature. He saw the Aten moving in the winds and bending the grain in the fields. He saw the palms sway to the breath of the Aten. He beheld in the motion of all things one life ever moving. So art was for the first time linked to nature. The music in the soul of the dreamer became a music of line, and a deeply satisfying consciousness lifted Egyptian art to the level of great genius. It was natural that Akhenaten's understanding affected not only technique but subject matter. The Aten gave dignity to simple things, and Akhenaten was filled with the realization of the beauty and divinity of the commonplace. He elevated the normal circumstances of life to a new standard of significance. He found more of God in the home and the family and in men at their work. He felt it appropriate not to carve great images of heavenly kings with flails, shepherds' crooks, and the scepters of the three worlds. His art was the Aten moving the simple things to rightness. A deeply religious spirit shows through the sculpturing and painting of his period. The Aten is everywhere present, mingling with all things on equal terms, loving the least with the greatest, seated at the poor man's table as surely as at the feast of princes. The inevitable result of believing in an impersonal, omnipresent, universal Father was a democratic attitude toward all classes of people. The Aten was in the slave and made even the humblest serf a participant in divinity. If the Aten made no distinction for family or class, neither could he who served the Aten. Thus, democracy came as the natural result of the correct interpretation of the universal plan. If a man correctly understands God and lives that understanding completely, he inevitably puts his life and world in order. To the Egyptian mind, the problem of death was always deeply significant. In the old religion, the souls of those who passed on gathered into a strange universe of gods and demons to be weighed at last upon the scales of judgment before the many-eyed Osiris. Here again, Akhenaten sounded a challenge to all the beliefs of men. He believed the Aten to be everywhere, and those who died departed not from it, but remained in it forever. Therefore, there could be no hell, for hate and suffering and doubt had no place in a universe full of love and truth. The pharaoh believed that those who died lived in a misty world beyond. But in that world also rose the Sun of Truth, and the souls of the dead turned up their faces to the light, while the countless hands from the rays of the Aten lifted each and sustained each with the ever-living law. Quotations from the hymns of Akhenaten. O living Aten, beginning of life, though thou art afar, high rays are on earth, though thou art on high, thy footprints are the day. How manifold are all thy works! They are hidden from before us, O thou sole God, whose powers no other possesseth. The birds flutter in the marshes, their wings uplifted in adoration to thee. Thou makest the beauty of form through thyself alone. Thou art in my heart. There is no other that knoweth thee, save thy son Akhenaten. For thou art duration beyond thy mere limbs. By thee man liveth, the world is in thy hand, even as thou hast made them. The fish in the river rise to the surface towards thy face, and thy rays penetrate the great waters. Thou created the earth according to thy will when thou wast alone. The chick is in its egg, cheeping within its shell. Thou givest it breath therein that it may live. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.